Today I wanted to talk about something that I think deserves a little bit more recognition. The Owl House is a kid-friendly fantasy show on Disney Plus created by Dana Terrace. It is a show full of magic and witches and magical creatures. I never really caught the show when it was coming out. I would only see fan art online or cosplays of Ida in various forms. Other than that, I didn't really know about the show except for word of mouth. After a friend of mine suggested that I watch it, I finally did. I would catch a couple episodes a night and generally really enjoyed the show. I wouldn't say I deeply fell in love with it. It was just a nice, casual appreciation of the show. I thought it was very well animated. The music was really good. The stories were good, the characters were very well written. However, over the weekend, I decided to start watching the show again. And it just so happened that I stopped watching the show right before one of the best episodes. So what started as a casual reintroduction into the show quickly became this fall into this deep well of emotion that I have spent the past few days trying to reconcile with myself. I have now finished the show. It took me about 2 days, and it has taken me a couple more days to sort of write the script out for this video. That said, this is a different kind of video than I usually make. I have never tried making something quite like this before, so we'll see how this goes. It's not going to be so much a review of the show, although I will do some of that. It's going to be more of a plead to you, the audience, my friends, strangers. I just think you should watch this show. It's really, really good. I know you can watch it right now because Mandalorian Season 3 is still happening, I think, or it just finished. One of those two, but it's around recently. You can watch it. So, I really won't be spoiling anything until towards the very end, and I will make sure I give everybody a warning before I do that. This video mostly exists because I have a lot of feelings about this show, and I kind of want to get them out. It's mostly going to be this unhinged rant and gush about what is now one of my favorite shows, and I'm going to try to resolve some of that in the edit. This is also partially existing to stave off said gushing to my friend who told me about the show, because when I see them again, they're unfortunately gonna have to deal with how much I love this show. It's just gonna be a lot, so I apologize in advance. This video is partially for them too. Albeit in a roundabout way. The Owl House is a show about a human named Luz Nocita who does not fit her societal expectations. She is a giant nerd and a genuinely strange individual in the sense that she actually really has this like deep abiding love for strange and or gross things. I cannot stress this enough. Luz is a weirdo and I absolutely love her for it.
But I don't like any of that stuff. I like editing anime clips to music and reading fantasy books with convoluted backstories.
After some trouble at school due to some experimental taxidermy and a very violent rendition of the end of Romeo and Juliet, the school gets involved with Luz's mother and basically suggests that Luz should go to a special summer camp to kind of get the weird out of her and basically make her into society's good little conformist. Obviously, Luz takes issue with this. You can kind of tell that Luz's mother, Camila, doesn't actually really want this for her. She just wants Luz to be happy. When Luz's fantasy novel is stolen by what appears to be an owl, she chases the owl into the woods, finds this abandoned shack, and that's where she meets...
I'm Ida, the Owl Lady, the most powerful witch on the Boiling Isles.
Luz is then thrust into this world of the Boiling Isles, and she follows Ida to her house, known as the Owl House. From there we meet the rest of the cast, including the Owl House itself, named Hootie, and we meet Ida's roommate slash pet slash child sort of thing named King, who is a former Lord of Demons who demands to be respected and obeyed. But look at him, he's just so cute. He's my little baby. He's my little guy. Throughout the show, we get introduced to more aspects of the Boiling Isles, and we get to learn a little bit more about our main cast of characters and are introduced to a slew of other characters, all of which are awesome, and I'll be talking about extensively in a little bit here. Luz resolves to lie to her mother, saying that she is actually going to this summer camp, but she is actually going to be staying at the Boiling Isles with Ida to try to live out her witch girl fantasies, basically. The structure and flow... Oh, there's a plane. We gotta wait for the plane. Somebody was hammering earlier. At least it's not that right now. The structure and flow of these episodes is mostly episodic, with the main conflict of the episode being resolved by the end. That said, there are through lines with character arcs and overarching stories regarding main villains and various character beats along the way. But mostly you can kind of sit down, watch an episode, and more or less have an enclosed experience. It's not what I did, but you can do that. We learn more about Hexside, how magic works, the different schools of magic, the differences between how humans and demons practice magic. We learn the history of the Boiling Isles, and we even learn some of the social and political hierarchy of the Boiling Isles. Some of this is explicitly stated, but some of this is also just merely implied. A big point in the world building and how magic works is the 9 different schools of magic. Each witch has to pick a learning path, a school of magic, and pretty much stick with that path for the rest of their life. Once Luce, our main character, enrolls in Hexside partway through season 1, this is actually something she takes great issue with, as she really wants to learn every single aspect of magic, but finds that through this school system she actually has to stick with one.
Studying multiple tracks at once? No one does that.
Then I'll be the first.
And this is where I think my love for the show and the unavoidable parallels of another famous school of witchcraft and wizardry come into play. But first, I want to talk about the themes of being an outcast and rebellion that are very present and explored quite heavily through every single character in this series. Even as early as the first episode, the idea of our main characters being outcasts, weirdos, rebels is very well established. I talked about Luce not really having any friends and being forced by the school and, to an extent, her mother to go to the summer camp to be normalized. Ida Clawthorne is also a rebel and an outcast, a witch who refuses to conform to one school of magic and regularly flaunts the idea that she practices all these other schools of magic. And she is very proud of the fact that she is this way because it makes her much more powerful than everybody else. It's the reason why she's able to get away with so much throughout the course of the show. And again, this idea of being rebels and being outcasts is reinforced, especially in the first episode.
Us weirdos have to stick together, you know?
If there's a thesis that the show has, this line is it.
Because us weirdos have to stick together. And nobody should be punished for who they are.
Ida prides herself on her independence, King wants to be respected and feared, and Luce wants to feel accepted and understood. Without spoiling too much, by the end of the show, they all kind of realize that yes, they really do need to stick together. Many, if not all of our secondary characters are also extensions of these themes. Some of them are outcasts like Willow and Gus, who become Luce's friends, and some of them are actually a part of this oppressive and conformist system, like Amity, Lilith, and eventually the Golden Guard. One of the things I love about the show is that all of these characters, regardless of which side of the oppressive system they're on, are shown to be affected and negatively impacted by this system. Even those in the Emperor's Coven, who, by the rules of the system, should be benefiting the most from it, are actually also forced to conform to the system for the sake of the continued existence of this system. This show very easily could have had a good guys and bad guys dynamic, but it very rarely has that. It is mostly illustrative of how this sort of hierarchy is actually harmful to everybody involved. If you haven't guessed it, this actually has some very disturbing real-world parallels. It's patriarchy. I'm talking about patriarchy. The patriarchy hurts everybody, even cisgender men. This show very easily could have good guys and bad guys as the dynamic, but it subverts those expectations and often makes the systems of oppression themselves the true villain. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as I get into specific characters. Just keep that in mind as we go forward. This section is going to be a little bit harder to talk about because I truly think they do not waste a character. Certain characters may get more screen time or have more fully realized character arcs, but I genuinely think they do a really good job of establishing motivation and character in every single one of these guys, especially in the main cast, the supporting cast, and even some of the tertiary characters. This section is just going to be really difficult because I'm going to try not to spoil a whole lot. I'm going to be very vague with how I place these clips, and I really just want to try to convey an idea of how good this show is in terms of fully realizing its characters, but I can't get that spoiler heavy yet, so I'm going to be as vague as possible once again. I also have to try to keep this video at a reasonable length. So if there's a character that you know and love and I have skipped them, know that their plot is probably very spoiler heavy. I had to cut them just for time. but it is very safe to assume that I love them just about as much as the Avatar fandom loves Zuko. Actually, that's a really good place to start. There's like 6 Zukos in this show. So many of the villains start out on one side of the conflict, on the side of this sort of like oppressive system, and throughout the show, for one reason or another, come to realize how oppressive this hierarchy actually is. And so they switch sides and become friends with the main cast of characters. And that's kind of part of the reason why it's hard to talk without doing spoilers in the show, because basically all of my favorite characters are in that kind of Zuko category. It's hard to talk about them without getting into spoilers, so know that that's there. There are several characters where their entire existence and their entire character arc is built around the switching sides. There are other characters where that arc is only realized towards the very end of the show. There's even one character that sort of starts out as a joke, as a character who has switched sides, but actually ends up being like the catalyst for which one of the main characters fully realizes their own arc. And it's really pretty awesome the way they do it. It's probably, in fact, like the most textual, stated want versus need conversation in the show. It's not subtle, but it is sort of funny and actually very well done. Not everything needs to have 7 layers of text to communicate subtext. Sometimes it could just be text, and it works really well in this, I think. So the other characters, the ones who start out on the good side anyway, don't just have external conflicts either. There's a lot of internal conflict that happens with those characters. This can be learning where your skills and interests truly lie, learning how to express your feelings for someone, or even learning how to let someone else help you express those feelings. Confiding in someone, learning to trust. That's a big theme in the show, is kind of being okay with asking for help. And I think that is very important in a show that is largely targeted at kids. And that really helps with this thing that sort of starts to come into sharp focus as the show goes on. The characters really have each other's backs. There might be little conflicts here and there, and disagreements and frustrations, and even outright anger towards each other. But there's never really a point where I really question the future of Gus and Willow's friendship, or the aunt-niece dynamic that Ida and Luce have. Even the Hootie and relationship that happens later on in the show. There are even some conflicts later on where certain characters are afraid of revealing sensitive information to their friends because they're afraid it'll actually break this relationship. It'll actually make things harder for them. But these characters throughout the show learn to trust each other, so by the time these conflicts arise, it's still tension-filled, you still feel something, and you feel the pain that these characters are going through by having this information revealed, but you always feel that these characters are going to be there for each other, and that is beautiful, and I love that, and it's very important, again, in a kid's show. Okay, that's about as much as I can talk about characters in the vaguest possible sense without getting into spoilers, and even then I sort of failed at that. So I'm gonna shelve characters as a concept for the moment, and we're gonna go into... This show is very LGBTQ friendly, and is very open about that fact. There are multiple queer characters, and there's an overt willingness to display that fact in the text. Without spoiling anything major, one of the main characters is bisexual, and this is part of their characterization throughout the run of the show. There is another character who is lesbian, at least 2 non-binary characters, several possible asexual characters, and the trope of all tropes, 2 gay dads. It is also highly possible, and probable even, that more gay characters and bisexual characters exist throughout the show, but those characters exist more subtextually rather than textually. The subtextual aspects of characters like Darius and Alador are there, and sometimes really heavy-handed, but still exists as mostly subtext. It is kind of a bummer that our same-sex male couples get so little screen time in comparison to their non-binary and female counterparts, but I'm here to praise the Owl House, not to deride it. I also want to say that this subtextuality would be frustrating in any other show where these aspects are more in between the lines, but in a show like the Owl House, I'll say it is just kind of the cost of doing business that you don't have time for all inclusivity, and at the end end of the day, it is still Disney and they have some control. I also think that these subtextual elements like Darius are much more real in a show like The Owl House that is much more open about queerness than in something like Harry Potter, where Dumbledore's gayness is always in the background if it can be said to have really existed at all. I am only putting this disclaimer here because I want to talk more about the show's explicit queerness rather than its implicit queerness. The queer stuff is really why I wanted to talk about this show in the first place, and the explicit nature of it is really what sold it for me. To clarify, when I say explicit, I don't mean lewd or inappropriate for children. This is still a kids show on Disney+, so there's never going to be much, if anything, in the way of sexually explicit material. What I mean by explicit in the context of queerness in The Owl House is how it is very textually apparent in the show. There's never a point in the show where the queer characters' sexualities are questioned or just merely hinted at and then ignored otherwise. The queer characters in the show get into queer relationships. They stay in queer relationships. It's never treated as like an abnormal or bad thing, and that's really why I'm talking about it. That's why I love this, and why I've spent the past couple of days ugly crying every time I review a clip of the show or think about it or feel myself just wanting to talk about it so much. There's so much of the show to love, and the show is in so many ways about love in so many various forms. The queerness of these characters is never treated as an abnormal thing by society. It is never treated as an abnormal thing by the other characters around them. Queerness in The Owl House is normal, and that's what's so refreshing, especially in an animated kids show on Disney+. It's not where you expect to find something like this. Alright, we're converging again. I really tried to talk as much as I could about this stuff without involving heavy spoilers, but when it comes down to it, what I really love about this show is just super spoiler heavy. So if you really don't want to be spoiled, this is basically the end of the video for you. I hope I've done enough of a good job of explaining why the show is great, and I really think you should give it a watch. If you're a fan of Gravity Falls, Adventure Time, if you like Avatar, you'll like this show. I would be very surprised if you like those other three things and don't like The Owl House. It is really, really good. Go watch the show and then come back. We'll talk. We'll have a heart-to-heart. We'll ugly cry together. It'll be great. It'll be a good time. All right. I warned you. Here we are. So throughout the first season of the show, it is strongly hinted at that Amity and Luz both have feelings for each other that go beyond their blossoming friendship. These hints are made explicit in the season 1 episode Enchanting Gromfright, in which the fears of both Amity and Luz are explored. They share a couples dance together, and it is actually revealed that Amity wanted to ask Luz to Grom in the first place. In the second season, Luz and Amity finally start an actual relationship together after getting help from both Ida, Hootie, and actually even Amity's siblings, which is pretty cool. Throughout the rest of the show, Amity and Luz are in this relationship together and refer to each other as girlfriends. While there's definitely some conflict surrounding the actual relationship, it is treated like any other teen romance in a show about teens. It is a relationship, it is normal, it is just that. And it's really deep, and it's really beautiful. When Ida and some of the other characters find out, the questions that Ida asks are more, what are you going to do about this crush? How are you going to go about asking her out? Rather than, oh, are you sure you like girls? Or, oh, you like girls. There's never a question of that. It's always treated as, oh, this is a crush that you have. Let's figure that out together.
He was trying to help me ask Amity out.
Oh, whoa. Do you wanna?
And I love that. That is so important, and such an important distinction in the framing of these kinds of relationships to children especially, but also to the adults that consume queer media like this. There's never really even a coming out scene explicitly for Luz being bisexual until the beginning of season 3, in which she comes out to her mother, and this is in the human realm, which unfortunately is a bit more of a normal place for that sort of thing to happen. In the Boiling Isles, in the demon realm, queerness is completely fine. It's completely normal. It's just a thing that is part of life. James Somerton actually has a really good video about how badly Disney as a company handled this show in promoting it and canceling it well before its time. But there's also a really good section where he talks about how the themes of queerness and the character's queerness comes forth in thematic ways in their rebellion, in their outcast lives throughout the main plot of the show. It's not just a character trait, it is part of the way the show communicates its themes and messages, and I think that is really good. For more information on that, I would just watch James Somerton's video because he's going to do a much better job than I would here. The point is that this helps normalize queerness itself to the audience, to the kids, probably queer kids who are watching this show, and also to the cisgender straight people who are watching the show. Not only does this normalize queerness for the audience, but it also reinforces the idea that these characters are always going to have each other's backs. They're there for each other. And this is true for the other queer relationships on the show. Ida and Rain have a troubled history, but once Rain is introduced in season 2, there's pretty much no question that these characters are going to be there for each other. They're helping each other out, even if they are on opposite sides of this conflict for a while. And yeah, I know a lot of people before season 3 really shipped Gus and Hunter, but I'm kind of glad that they didn't do that because there is a significant age gap between Gus and Hunter, and it would have felt a little weird if our only, like, really apparent gay couple on the show was dubious in the area of age appropriateness. We have Call Me By Your Name for that. There may be times when Amity and Luz are insecure about the state of their relationship or keep secrets from each other, but these things are always resolved in some way. There's never really a point where they're in danger of breaking up. They stay together throughout the rest of the show. Once it's established in season 2 that they're together, they're together. That kind of representation and the normalization of that representation is really important for media, and especially in media for kids. Speaking from experience, I would not have necessarily come to realize things about my own identity if it weren't for shows like this. But here's the thing, there weren't really shows like this when I was a kid, at least as far as I know, and if there were, I didn't know about them and I didn't watch them. I've had a lot of stuff about myself that I've sort of closed off from everybody else, and only recently have sort of come to grips with it and sort of come to be able to express it fully and comfortably to everybody. And when I was growing up, I didn't really have the kind of language to be able to express those things. So shows like this that kind of show you how normal it can be abnormal, to so to speak, really can help your self-esteem and can also get you to ask questions about yourself that maybe you wouldn't otherwise feel comfortable asking. If there was a show like The Owl House when I was growing up, then maybe things would have turned out a little bit differently in terms of my own self-perception. I don't necessarily want to entertain such a broad hypothetical like that. I think I would have been a lot more better off in certain ways than I was back then. That's what I love about this show. It's not only extremely well written with wonderfully fully realized, well-written characters, but also is very open about its queerness and the audience it's catering towards. And it's not only just catering to that audience, but presenting it in such a way that basically anybody can enjoy it. There's a wide range of adults who love this show, and I really, really think more people need to see it. It's unfortunate it was canceled before its time. I didn't even really talk about the specifics of Hunter's arc, or the Collector, or V, or the way in which Luz's weirdness and outcastness isn't ever a huge problem or resolved past a certain point, and the character just sort of being okay with it. What she wants is acceptance externally, and not necessarily self-acceptance. She's already got there. To illustrate that point, I want to talk very briefly about an episode of Gravity Falls in which one of the main characters, Mabel, is having a crisis about whether her quirkiness and her strangeness is affecting her ability to relate to people and solve problems. And by the end of the episode, she comes to the conclusion that no, in fact, her quirkiness and her weirdness are what make her great.
You know what, Dipper? I've got nothing to prove. I've learned that being silly is awesome.
In The Owl House, the same sort of theme is present with Luz, but it's not only explored throughout the entire show instead of just one episode, but is also much more of an external conflict. Luz is pretty secure about who she is as a person, and that's what makes her great. It's being accepted by everybody else that is kind of the problem. And I think that mirrors the queerness as a theme super well in the show. Maybe in the future, if all things go well here, I'll make another video about The Owl House. I could easily see myself talk about how this show subtly puts queer colors and queer flags in the color schemes of the show. Maybe I'll make my own AMV of Darius and Alador, brief though the content is. For now, I'm gonna go finish Gravity Falls as I am in a very Hersheyan mood at the moment. Farewell!